So we got the wheels here for the steam locomotive at Pioneer Park, and they've been having trouble with other stuff we got to do here, but also the tread, the flange is a little bit high. And how'd that get here? Oh, I knew this was here. Okay, but you don't know how it got here, and that's the point. Bert is going to post up how it got here on a lowboy truck, but there's a lot more to it than that. And this one here, it's in here for the same thing, but we got the whole locomotive in, and that's for working on the wheels. And why I say, how did it get here? How was it even born? This is the only locomotive that was ever made by C.M. Lovestead. C.M. Lovestead, if you're into live steamers, if you are into model railroading, you'll see their catalogs everywhere because they made parts. The furthest back that I could find was 1915, but they go back quite a ways. And they made parts. They were out of Seattle, and the big thing with making parts, of course, was the logging railroads. They also shipped parts to the Hawaiian fields for sugarcane. And when Walt Disney decided that he wanted to have a Disneyland locomotive, the people he was working with, they built the locomotive, but they got a hold of Lovestead that made these parts to buy the wheels and trucks and couplers and a lot of the same parts that are on this one right here. They would have been identical to what's on this. So in Fairbanks here, we had the steam locomotive. It was built in 1899. It was a mine locomotive. The mine locomotive is a lot like your smaller logging locomotives and a lot of stuff, so it's in the same size class. It's a narrow gauge. It's 3 foot rail spacing on the inside of the rails. But it was a regular working locomotive. However, they brought it up here to work on their main line, and it didn't run for a whole long time because they got bigger locomotives, built up more lineage of track, and it just got pushed off to the side. But it was a relic that really excited people in the Fairbanks area. Kids like Fred, that was in one of our videos recently, played on it when he was a kid. You know, it sat down in town, and all kinds of people played on it. And people used it just to burn garbage and all different things too. So that was here, and they decided that they wanted to have a exposition for the 100th anniversary of Seward's Folly, of the purchase agreement for the trapping rights with Russia. So that was the start of the A67 exposition, which then was going to be Park A67, later named Alaska Land and currently named Pioneer Park. I don't know why we have to keep changing names, but we do that. It's just part of what, I think government's involved with that. So anyway, when they started that park, they said, we want to have a locomotive, but not just any locomotive. We want one that is like the steam locomotive that everybody's had here in town. That's just rusted up, doesn't work, but we want one that kind of looks like it. Ideally, it would be a steam locomotive. So they called up Lovestead, and Lovestead said, yeah, we got parts and stuff. We could put together a locomotive for you. And the price for a steam one was too expensive. So they talked back and forth. They came up with what they could build for a locomotive and 4 cars for $27,500 in 1967, which sounds like no money. Of course, you could buy, at that time, you could have bought 8 Ford pickups and 2 GT 500s to go with it. I mean, it was a fair amount of money back then. So anyway, that was the price, which surprised me how cheap it was. It still seems cheap, even figuring inflation. So they built this, and it ran around the park. I took the locomotive because it had quite a few little design flaws. We'll go through that later, but that's not the first thing. I want to just talk more about, like I say, how it got here. So in 2004, they put out a contract, and what they originally, actually in 2004, the first thing they were going to do was just replace the locomotive, because the park didn't really care so much about whether it looked like the original locomotive or not. They just wanted to replace it, have another locomotive to run around, the borough did. And they found out they had been setting aside money for a locomotive. They found out that you couldn't buy it just within a month or two. You had to order it in advance. And they also found out that it was more expensive than they thought it was going to be. Now, also, which they did not know, but I looked through the paperwork, what they were looking at was a Chance Industries locomotive, which is a 24-inch gauge ride-on locomotive. It would not have worked in the park at all, even if they had gotten one. So they put out the contract to refurbish the locomotive. I got the locomotive by being a high bidder. Let's see, I think I was $250 above the next bidder. Anyways, $197,500 is what I bid to refurbish it, and I did a whole lot more than what was required on the bid, because I wanted to do it, make it nice. The time and material for what we did came out to $315,000, because you do kind of a double thing when you're working this, is you put in time and material for what you've put on it, and then they keep paying you until it gets to the end of the bid, the way that the local government does it here. And when you get to the end of the bid, you can keep turning in receipts to them for what you're doing, but they just won't pay you anything. So I thought as long as I was doing it, it would be interesting to keep track of it. And that was kind of the first larger job that I had done dollar-wise. So I thought, yeah, we'll keep track. And it came out just about $315 if we had done time and materials, which our rates have gone up a little more since then. I actually, about 15 years ago, and I don't remember exactly, but I think it was $650,000 I bid for building one like this. And I think I told them for $600,000 if they had two of them, $600,000 each. I don't remember. It was somewhere in there if I was building one. The Chinese at that same time were refurbishing steam locomotives of this size that they were quitting using in China, and they were $2 million a copy. So I really didn't think I was that far off. I also was looking at the possibility of using a water tube steam generator, so you don't have all of the problems but still run it on steam. And I had some pretty interesting ideas. When I offered to the park to do this, I had offered actually as possibility of powering this by the gas engine that was here, a diesel, or electric hybrid, all for the same price. And fortunately, they chose the gas, because what the diesel would have been good too, though. The diesel would have actually saved me money, even though would have spent more buying the engine new. So with the diesel engine, we would have been able to bolt the air compressor and the transmission directly on it without any problems. Where getting good mount-ups for the new transmission, which was not that much different than the old one, but the old one was mounted poorly. And the air compressor was mounted poorly. And we'll go ahead and go over that today in another video, but I don't think you'll see it today. I think Bert will probably break this off with the one is just the one. Well, I still haven't gotten through with that. I guess I stopped in part of that, because that gets me into where I was refurbishing this, and then they have ran it for 19 years since I refurbished it. Previous to that, they had to redo side rods, bearings, no longer than 1.5 summers. They had to redo all the drive underneath. It was just a continual thing. I did put new wheel bearings in it once in the last 19 years. That actually happened in the second year. So for the last 17, it's ran on the same wheel bearings with no problem. There was some really rough spots in the track at first. They smoothed some of that out. The track, yeah, let's go back there too. Okay, so now once I started to work on this, I called up the remnants of Lovestead, because they were, in fact, well, they still did some more for this locomotive in the early 80s. And I can't tell for sure with the paperwork. I know from the wheels that they have that they're Lovestead wheel sets. But I honestly don't know if they were sold by McMaster Carr, because McMaster Carr was selling wheel sets that met the specifications of Lovestead wheel sets. And I see a bid in the old documents that came with the problems and information they'd had with the locomotive, that they were looking at buying wheel sets for the cars, not for the locomotive, but for the cars from McMaster Carr. So they could have been Lovesteads that were bought through McMaster Carr, or they could have been bought directly from Lovestead. I don't have the purchase order, I just have some bids that went back and forth. And I didn't have a bid showing up from Lovestead. When when they first brought this out, everything was, as I say, it was a 27,500. I found out a little bit more about all of that when I got a hold of Lovestead. Lovestead was defunct, but I took the address and I found some phone numbers that matched with that address currently as of 2005. So, and I called up and I got a hold of one of the descendants of the Lovestead Manufacturing Company. The Lovestead wheels and all that was done. I forget what the business was there. I kind of think they were doing injection molded plastics, but I don't remember for sure. They had something else they were doing. And the interesting thing was, he said, well, actually at first it was one of the secretaries I caught, and they said, here's the guy, which is when I got a hold of the man that was the descendant. He gave me the phone number of Dale Laurer. And Dale Laurer at the time was 87 years old, and in 05. And he told me, when I started talking with him, I was asking him if he remembered, locomotive number 6, serial number 67. And he said, oh, the locomotive. So then I found out that it was the locomotive. You have a company that made locomotive parts for almost 100 years, only made one locomotive. Anyway, so I chatted with him for a while. When they first brought this up here, there was no suspension for any of the wheels. They were all bolted straight in line onto the frame, because that was part of the cost savings. No suspension up or down, no turning, nothing, just fixed wheels. And they told them that the curves had to be really sweeping, no sharp radiuses, and they told them that the hills couldn't be too steep, and they got 5% grade, and they've got 30-foot radius out there. I mean, this track, it's beautiful the way it all works, but when they first took this out there, Dale said it would go about 20 foot and derail itself. It was not going to work, just not a chance. So what they did was they cut loose the rear wheels and they made a sliding suspension, which is still on here. When I did the refurbish on the train, other than cleaning it up a little bit and running new grease fittings onto it, it still worked fine. And they did this as an emergency job in Fairbanks, Alaska, after delivery. And Dale said they spent 2 weeks of their time plus 2 weeks of hiring Fairbanks Machine and Steel, which you've heard me talk before that I used to work for, but this was before I was ever there, because I was 7 years old when this happened. So anyway, but they worked together and they made this sliding suspension. So this suspension here, this little truck actually has a kind of like a fifth wheel plate that it free slides on. So the front wheels guide it, and then this just follows behind and allows it to swing around. There's a pivot somewhere up here underneath that it pivots off of. We can't really see all of that at this point, but it worked. It worked really good. They were having trouble with the cars because cars, again, to be cheap, didn't have a bogie set like this. They didn't have a wheel set. They were individual wheels. They had 2 wheels at the front fixed, 2 wheels at the back of each car fixed. And so they were wearing badly and not tracking well. So that was when they bought bogie sets, which from McMaster Carr were amazing. And that's where I kind of think they probably bought from Lovestead. And the McMaster Carr ones were probably smaller, but in 1979, they're saying $390 some per bogie set. That just sounds too cheap in 79. I think they're probably respecting a smaller one, and they probably got a hold of Lovestead, realized they were making a mistake. And although thinking about it, there was somebody was mentioning to me about them getting some really small wheels that they couldn't use. They may have actually ordered both. That's not unusual. They may have ordered the wrong ones and then ordered the right ones too. Yeah, anyway. So we took the whole thing down to the frame. I've got a really old video on YouTube explaining all of what we did to it, but we'll go through it some more. And it's been 19 years, and we're just supposed to be doing the tire treads right now. They've got a switch that is hitting on the flanges. They've got, it's grooved in, you know, like wheels do when they get worn. It's grooved in quite a bit here, but the flange is too high. And the flange being too high, it would be too high even if the wheels were not worn, because they've got a bolt, the way they've moved their switches around, that's pretty high up to the rail. It's only got an inch and 1/8 of clearance, so we'll give an inch of flange up above when we re-taper the wheels. We're not going to fully reshape them, there's no need for that, but we will fix the taper and cut the flange down. And we'll take it apart. This, so now I'll get on to describing things and differences here. That was part of it too, yeah, okay, more of the original. This was both